Welcome to Conversations with the Planets with Lori Kaufman and Alicia Cielle Heiser, a podcast that roots the wisdom of the stars into our lived experiences here on Earth and weaves the power of diverse healing modalities together with astrology. And today we have our good friend Elias on, who is an astrologer and musician, and we're going to be talking about the ways that astrology and music are related and overlap and interact with each other, which I'm super excited to dig into. And Elias and I met at NORWAC in 2022 now, and both lived in Seattle for a few years together and just became really good friends. And we both have a lot of air sign energy in our charts. So we're always sending each other like
Mhm.
heady philosophical thoughts and musings. And it's just fun to have astrologer friends. So shout out to NORWAC and shout out to all of the like Lori and I also met at NORWAC. So there's just so much
Mhm.
good community that's been built there. But yeah, welcome, Elias. Thank you for coming on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Yeah, excited to be here.
Yeah, do you want to tell us a little, just like whatever feels organic and natural to say about like what you do, what your practice is like how you want to share yourself?
Sure. Yeah. I'm Elias. Yeah, this is exciting because this is kind of a merging of worlds for me a little bit. I I guess I think of myself kind of first as a musician, um, and also an astrologer. But so yeah, it'll be fun to kind of get into some of the crossovers. Yeah, I think that's probably good for now.
Yeah, that's awesome. And we'll definitely link down to all of Elias's info so that you can find their music because they're really he's a great musician, and so just like make that so folks can come find it. And yeah, I mean, there's so much connection between astrology and music, and so maybe I know you had been talking a little bit about the history and the way they overlap, and I know we don't want to spend too much time there, but do we want to just lay the context a bit for how astrology and music have been seen in relationship to each other?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, when I was first thinking about this, I was just going kind of back in history, and it seems to me kind of the further you go back, the more interwoven music and astronomy or astrology are, and I think the definition of music is a little bit more vast than we might think of it, in the modern age. Um, and so, just as a theoretical notion, music as like harmony, as kind of as ratio and number, um, I think is how, like, if we go back to like the Pythagoras and the notion of like the music of the spheres, um, we have this idea that the the motions of the planets themselves is like a form of music, um,
Mm.
and so there's a lot of just parallels in thinking about time and frequency as kind of foundational to the what music is in kind of a mathematical or like literal sense. And we have all those things in astrology. We measure how instead of uh, like a frequency being like a waveform that we need it to be at least like 40. Sorry, my cat's getting in the way. Um, I think like one of the lowest tones we can hear with our ears is like 20 hertz or something like that. Maybe we can go a little bit lower, but that's like 20 repetitions in 1 second, and that's a super low pitch that we can just like feel, but not necessarily even discern the pitch of. Um, and then astrology, like if we think about a Saturn cycle, that's that's like 29 years for one wave, right? So we can't really obviously hear that or measure it, um, but we can think about that as an analogy to music and how, a certain combination of waves, we can feel that in our body. Um, I think the notion is that it's kind of the same way that like a planetary cycle might affect us. It's kind of the same logic, I guess, of like a repeating pattern or wave kind of hitting our human bodies and experiences. Um, but yeah, that's kind of what I get of out of the basic notion of the music of the spheres, um, as essentially just setting up an analogy of the motions of the heavens, as music that can hit our bodies and um, cause us to experience it in certain ways.
Yeah, absolutely. And thinking of how the different planets can be different notes or harmonies, like what would Mars sound like versus what would Venus sound like, and how are those like rhythms playing out through us, right? Because it's all rhythm at the root of it, and that's like the big thing for me astrologically is connecting people to our cyclical rhythms, and music needs rhythm to
Mhm.
flow as well. So
Yeah, um, totally. Yeah, and I think I guess I just want to kind of give a little bit of a disclaimer here. I think my overall take on these subjects is that it's really great that we get to like ask questions about this and kind of approach it with curiosity. And I think I don't think we'll ever get to the bottom of these things, which is a good a good thing if you ask me. And I don't think there's like a 1-to-1 ratio of like or correspondence of like Mars is this frequency or this sound or this. And there's been a lot of proposed models by um, I think of like Kepler had a whole system, and many figures in history have, and I think there's a lot of people today who are interested in turning a chart into a piece of
mm,
music or a sound or something. And
Mhm.
while that is I could geek out about that stuff for a long time. There's 12 signs, there's 12 notes, and there's a lot of ways in which you could go about doing something like that. Um, but to me, like if if you just walked outside and made a musical composition based on like the lines that just happened to be in the sand that some birds made or something like that,
Hmm.
I think that would be just as valid as like a musical interpretation of the chart of the moment. um,
Yeah.
it's not that interesting to me to try to come up with like a one-to-one correspondence between these languages. But it is really interesting to kind of uh, what's the word? Kind of yeah, just try on different ideas and kind of code switch back and forth between these languages.
Mhm.
mhm.
But yeah, I mean, thinking about music as a language and astrology as a language is like another way, kind of
Yeah.
in.
Yeah. And I think, correspondences, we were talking about this in a recent episode when we were talking about the love cards and tarot as well. But
Mhm.
a lot of times people want to have these one-to-one correspondences where, this means this, or, from an herbal perspective, looking at like St. John's wort must be solar and that's it. And like while St. John's wort blooms around the summer solstice, it's bright yellow. There's a lot of different ways you can associate it with the sun. That doesn't mean that you couldn't see other planetary energies coming in as well. And yeah, correspondences are so complex. You can't just have this one to one, and they're so interpretive as well, which, maybe this can also help us kind of segue, because I know we want to talk about solar and lunar consciousnesses and the ways that, music and astrology, you could approach it from a more solar or lunar way, but you could maybe say that it would be very solar to try to have this technical, theoretical, like the note A corresponds to this planet or this zodiac sign, and, these different things one to one
Yeah.
having a formula. Whereas if you're more intuitively interpreting, like, we could all look at the lines in the sand that the bird makes and we could all write beautiful songs about it, and they'd all be equally meaningful and valid, but they'd all sound very different, and so um yeah, it is interesting the different ways we can kind of orient ourselves.
Yeah,
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying too about how people almost like intuitively want there to be one-on-one correlations with everything, not just with music, but I feel like that is like kind of a universal experience of like seeking these like very specific things to correlate when then like when they don't. It's like frustrating or confusing, but it's really just like so many things are just so up to interpretation, and nothing is black and white like that anyway. And just like music, not that I know anything about music really, but like music is definitely not black and white.
right. Yeah, and I think that speaks to that, that motivation to be able to discern things in a really
Mhm.
clear way and understand them. I think it speaks to
Yeah.
a certain kind of solar bias, but I do think
Mhm.
it's a little bit of a um, it's kind of like a vice of the sun or something like that. Like I think solar energy is kind of bigger than that. Um, I know you guys were just recording a episode on sect, and
Mhm.
I don't know if you touched on how, we live in a very like diurnal sun
Mhm.
focused
Yes.
society. Like Western society is very, you know, has a solar bias, but also the solar bias that it has, I think, is only one um, manifestation of the sun. And I do think there's like solar awareness and solar modes of consciousness that go beyond that sort of um, kind of answer seeking mindset.
Mm.
Um, but yeah, maybe we can get into that. So yeah, the sun and the moon, I think, are really great ways to frame um, different approaches to something like art or astrology. And I do want to give, just to frame why they're important. I want to give like an honorable mention to Venus and Mercury as planets that are definitely important when it comes to music and astrology. Like a lot of the traditional texts, like Venus is described as harmony and beauty and in art, and like singers and musicians are like kind of Venus. And then from Mercury, you get kind of the more inventor, kind of theorist side of music as well. So often delineation for like Mercury is that it also makes like musicians. Um, so music is generally like equated with kind of Mercury and Venus. Um, and we can see this in um, the myth of Hermes inventing the lyre from a tortoise shell. And he gives the lyre to Apollo, who is kind of a god associated with the sun. Um, and yeah, it's really interesting. You can see this in the zodiac reflected by uh, the two Mercury signs are bordering the signs of the luminaries, right? So you have Gemini and Virgo, and then between those domains of Mercury, you have the sun and the moon, Leo and Cancer. Um, and, tortoises are associated in many mythologies as sort of like a symbol of the whole world itself. Like I think in Hindu mythology, you have like a certain version of like Vishnu as like the tortoise shell with the world, the tortoise with the world on its shell.
Or,
And
Turtle Island here on North America is the indigenous, myth and understanding of how North America is as a continent as well.
yeah,
Mhm.
and so there's this kind of like cosmic discovery that Hermes, this sort of child god, stumbles into in inventing the lyre. And, I think this is different than, like, he's not really a composer himself, right? He gives the lyre to Apollo, and, um, we think of like Orpheus, um, more as like a kind of poet musician who's actually composing his own works. Um, whereas, uh, I want to read this quick quote that I happened to like flip to in this book. It's called Essays on a Science of Mythology: The Myth of the Divine Child and the Mysteries of Eleusis, um, by C.G. Jung and C. Karenyi. Not sure how to pronounce that, but um, let's see.
And wasn't this just like a random quote that you turned to this morning before we were gonna record this podcast today?
Yep, yep, yep. So here it is. So the lyre in the hand of the primordial child, Hermes, expresses the musical quality of the world quite apart from the poet's intention. It is first and foremost characteristic of Hermes himself. So the Homeric poet sensed the musical nature of the universe as essentially hermetic and located it in the Hermes color band of the world spectrum. In all probability, the poet was not seeking this primeval music, but its higher Apollonian form. So, yeah, I would like that because it distinguishes between the musical nature of the universe itself, um, just sort of what I was like hinting at earlier with the music of the spheres, and I think how the Pythagoreans thought of music. It wasn't so much as a um, artful, like poetic thing that associated with like personal expression or something like that, so much as just a fact of something that exists in the universe. That when we hear this ratio of sound waves, it hits our bodies in a certain way. As humans, it's just kind of what happens. Um, but Hermes kind of invents the lyre and gives it to Apollo. And so my idea that I've been playing with is that the luminaries, and I'm including the moon as well, because the moon is so intimately tied in with the sun, and um, Apollo's sister is Demeter, right, associated with the moon, um, and
Artemis, Apollo's sister, Artemis.
Artemis. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Artemis and Demeter being these virgin huntress figures associated with the moon. And Artemis also having certain musical qualities. I think there's some myths where like she leads the uh, nymphs in like song as they're hunting and stuff like this. So um, basically, my idea is that Venus and Mercury is kind of the substance of music, or like the fact of music as it exists in the universe, and then the sun and the moon is kind of as being very central to our consciousness, and I think spirit and body, sun and moon. It's kind of like, okay, you have the lyre, you have an instrument. It's like, now what are you gonna do with it? What's gonna be your approach? Um, so yeah, that led me um, to thinking about kind of solar and lunar modes of creation, and yeah. And while I'm still framing that, I just want to also just note that between the moon and the sun and Mercury and Venus, those are the first four spheres, right? Those are the spheres closest to us, the four fastest moving bodies, and so they're sometimes called like personal planets. I'm not sure if Mars gets lumped in as a personal planet sometimes too, but I think of these four spheres first as being kind of very related to like consciousness, and you can also there's four lots as well that I like to like think about as points also, in a chart, if you want to get to that level of specificity, that are calculated from those first four spheres. And so those would be fortune and spirit, being fortune is the lot of the moon, spirit the lot of the sun, and then you also get necessity and eros. Necessity I would view as kind of between Mercury and the moon, and then eros as like between Venus and the sun. But anyway, that's kind of it for the theoretical like model, I think, that I wanted to get into. So maybe we can kind of move on and get into some of the solar and lunar approaches.
Yeah, and I even have it on my screen, so I can go ahead and share the screen of the if you want to. If it's just like a thought that you had to kind of trigger thoughts, we don't need to, but I think that the chart you made is kind of cool and it would be kind of cool to share it.
Sure.
Um
wasn't
Cool.
necessarily planning on sharing the exact words that I wrote here, but we can do that. It's a little, you know, rough around the edges, but we can also talk through it in case people aren't watching the video version. But yeah, sounds
Yeah.
good.
Okay, awesome. And then also just while I'm chatting, I wanted to share because Elias had mentioned that Lori and I recorded an episode on sect, and we did that, and that has been shared. And so that's down in the show notes as well for folks who want to learn more about like what is lunar consciousness versus solar consciousness and how does that show up in the chart. So definitely go check out that episode on sect. But yeah, here we're just gonna kind of flesh out some of the examples of how we think that plays out musically, which I'm really excited to be doing. So I'll go ahead and share the screen. Can you guys see that all right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. So, yeah, these are just some of Elias's reflections on the different ways that music and astrology are, can be solar and lunar in different kind of manifestations and iterations.
Yeah, just a general kind of entering into this space. Yeah, just when I was first thinking about these two topics, one of the things that occurred to me is like both music and astrology can be very technical and mathematical. I mean, there's, no end to the complexity that you can get to with these two subjects, and there's plenty of examples of in both fields of highly technical versions of them. And then there's also very non-technical, very intuitive kind of pathways into both of these fields as well. And I'm kind of approaching that as the solar view is more theoretical and technical in its emphasis, and the lunar view is more intuitive, more just kind of a feel-based way of getting in. And yeah, the lunar approach is more subject to the whims of whatever chance thing kind of emerges, and is like less interested at realizing a specific vision. Um, does that kind of
Yeah, it's like the
make
moon
sense?
is more experiential. It's like because lunar consciousness is so much about your senses. And so that's kind of how I think of it is like, how are you sensing and experiencing and being in the moment of the music where the sun wants to project out and be seen in a certain way. And so you might be a little more focused on outcome with that.
Yeah,
Is that what you're saying?
yeah, totally. And
Yeah.
I think music leans toward lunar in nature, um, and astrology leans toward solar in nature. To me, as an
Mm-hmm.
overall thing, even highly technical music that was conceived of in a very solar fashion. When you listen, someone who doesn't know how it was made listens to it, um, they're probably going to perceive it. I think the perception of music is sort of a lunar phenomena of it just kind of hitting our body. And
Mm-hmm.
then we can try to analyze it and do all that, which is more of a solar process. Um, and then conversely, if we think about astrology, if you're doing an astrology reading or something, like I think maybe it's a process of trying to get to a lunar understanding, but we can only really do it through maybe not only, but um when we're looking at a chart and trying to make sense of, this glyph in this part of the chart, it is a mind-based process that we have to go through. And I think it's often a goal to kind of try to synthesize that into a more somatically felt thing, in a lot of cases. But yeah, that's kind of my experience with my kind of musical practice and my astrological practice is that I'm often finding myself going into a lunar space to do music and going into a more solar space to do astrology. I think there's both happening in both fields, and you can't really only do one without the other, right? Because we exist in a world with the sun and the moon, and we can't perceive the moon without the amount of sunlight that's on it. That's how we approach the moon. That's why the moon changes in different phases throughout the month, is as a result of the solar light that's projected onto it.
Yeah,
Oh,
absolutely. And it's so interesting the way you split this up because I grew up as a classically trained musician. Like I played violin until I was about 20, and I still sing, but I sang in choir until about 20 as well. And like was raised on Suzuki method and playing Beethoven and Bach and all of these very theoretical, like if you put a piece of music in front of me and ask me to just recite it back to you, I will be quite good at doing that. I have the solar consciousness of music
mm,
like trained into me over several decades at this point. But if you drop me down, like I'm going to fiddle camp this summer. I'm in a fifth house perfection year and I'm trying to just do more hobbies. And like best believe when you drop me down in the middle of a jam band like situation at fiddle camp this summer, I will not be able, like I'll need to be taught and be like really practicing that more lunar, intuitive, picking it up and
yeah.
playing. And I'm also a violinist and a soprano, so I'm not very good at harmonizing either because I always get the
Mm,
melody, and so it is interesting because I would agree that music is generally very lunar, and we all can just
yeah.
go and be, listening to live music and feel our hips move and feel it intuitively, and there's this very lunar component to it. But my personal relationship with being a musician has actually been quite solar and very technical focused.
Yeah, and to add my perspective, I guess, I don't know anything about music, but I do come from a dance background. And so for me, I am very much like a lyric person. Like I like the song if it has good lyrics, if it has poetry, if it has like a strong message or good words. Like to me that is what makes or break a song. But then the aspect of like dance and movement to it, it's like, well, can I dance to it? Like is it the kind of song that I can like almost like reenact what the words are saying? Like, can I create art based off of whatever the song is saying? So, like, music to me has always just been like a way to feel and a way to create. And I don't play music and I played piano when I was a kid, but like, other than that, like, I don't have experience on that side of it. But as the side of like creating almost like community with the music or like I teach a Zumba class that has a decent amount of people, so it's like what song is going to like get people really hyped up and like create that type of like excited emotion in it, or
Mhm.
it's like to me like music is really just what is the emotion tied to it.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I'm just thinking about, like, you know, my background in music is a lot more from like the jazz and improvisational music kind
Hmm.
of route. And but thinking about what you were both talking about in terms of the preparation of music has a
Hmm.
solar component, but then the actual experiencing of it is a lunar
Very
kind
lunar,
of
Hmm.
instantiation
very
of
emotional response.
yeah. And I think a lot about um I mean, I reject the notion that like jazz and improvised music is um but there's some like phrases that people say where it's like, oh, it's jazz, anything goes, or something like that. And I I don't really buy that. I think in a lot of cases, like Black American music basically took um, a lot of the like concepts in European classical music to like the nth degree, and just took the same um, relationship of like the five chord resolving to the one chord, and then they added a bunch of uh, more tension and more release to that model. And it requires a lot of detailed like solar practice to like get all of that technique down. But then there's a huge lunar component that I think is implicit in that tradition of music, um, where the goal, I think, is to sort of absorb all of these solar concepts so that you're prepared for the actual lunar process of playing the music. And like you have all these scales, all these whatever melodies, um sort of in your body, in a lunar way. So
Hmm.
I think there's some musician I like said something. It's like uh, you leave the brain stuff for the studio, and then you bring the magic to the show or to the stage. Um, and you kind of just have to get out of your head when if you're gonna like improvise. And you really just have to be trusting that the solar, knowledge that you have in your body like is gonna make its way out. And I think, yeah, the value of I have here on the chart, the value of like getting out of one's own way and
Hmm.
receiving music rather than trying to create it or trying to as if you're trying to tell a story or something like that. I think that's more of a lunar value in performance. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad you called that bullet point out specifically because that's one of my favorite points that you made on here is like the way of allowing, like, is it Elizabeth Gilbert who wrote Eat, Pray, Love? Is that her name? Because she has a really good podcast about your elusive creative genius that we'll link down below. But she talks about the ancient conception of like genius being like when you would
Mm.
create something, it wasn't your ego, it wasn't this solar way of being. It would be that these geniuses, these muses would literally visit you and you would become a vessel to channel their inspiration.
Right.
and
Channeling.
um and receiving it, and like for me, one of my greatest commitments in life is to listen and let the plants speak through me. Like that's how I orient myself around herbalism, is that I just want to be
Hmm.
a vessel for their wisdom and their teachings to come through. And I was born at nighttime. I have a night chart, right? I am a more lunar type person. But yeah, that orientation of how do music and creativity flow through us rather than us, producing it and putting it out and it being all about our ego.
Yeah, and I love the idea of like getting out of your own way too, because I
Mhm.
think a lot of people really struggle with that perfectionism of like, oh, it's not perfect yet, it's not perfect yet, it's not perfect yet. Like having to constantly like reassess and add more and change it. And um that's just like not reality. And I I personally have never really been like that. Like, I've never felt like a perfectionist. Like, I just have moments where I'm like, I'll throw something together and be like, it's done. Like, this is it. This is what I wanted it to be. Um, and you just look at it and it's like, it definitely like could have used help or it like could have been more, but like it didn't need to be. And yeah, I think there's definitely like both extremes, but yeah, just like kind of letting the art be what it wants to be instead of forcing it into being what it's not.
Mhm.
Right. Yeah, I think there's this great essay that Jung wrote on art, and I forget what it's called. But he said, the best explanation for a work of art is the work of art itself. Um,
Mhm.
Mm.
and we can get into a lot of theory and analysis of art as you know the idea that like a work of art reflects the artist's life is maybe true, but I think he Young makes the point that you know tr trying to kind of find the artist in their work, it's like at best you'll get to the point of like, yes, this is a human being that made this art, but um yeah, taking the like what does the art itself have to say, I guess, and being open to that rather than this notion that all art is like a person. It's like it's just a medium through which people express an idea. I don't think that's true. I think if like it'd be better to write an essay than to write a song if you wanted to um if you wanted to do that. At the same time, I do think there's uh there's a specificity that we can get to in music or poetry that we can't with in like an essay or just with regular words. And that's kind of an interesting thing. I think it is that's a lunar mode for me. I have here the universal pointing back to the personal.
I was curious
Um,
about that one too.
yeah. So I recently took this songwriting class that was led by Adrienne Lanker, and it was really cool. Um, she's a favorite songwriter of mine, and one thing she talked about, which I think she does beautifully in her music, is balancing the the universal with the personal. And you know, we need both for music to be like relatable. Like if I guess two extremes would be like if you had a song that was really really specific, that was just someone telling a specific story. Um, it becomes a little bit limiting of a song to relate to. Um, you know, uh, that's something that you might come back to that song and kind of hear the same thing every time if it's a really specific story. Um, and then on the other side, if it's just really vague kind of notions, a lot of like choruses of pop songs just have like a very relatable kind of refrain or something. But it's almost like too relatable that it just becomes uh I don't know, do you know what I like it's
Simplistic, like
yeah,
trite, or like, uh,
yeah,
yeah.
right. And so it's when you have kind of a blend of like, some specific details and then some kind of ties to the universal archetypal kind of realm. It's kind of like, you know, the mundane and the divine or something. And like when those like weave together, that's when you uh get something that I think you can relate to in a lot of different ways, and you get
Mm.
works of art that like you can come back to years later and like find new things every time. And I think there's like an admonition or like that's the wrong word. There's an admission that the song is kind of something bigger than we can understand. Um, so that was one thing I took away from that class was just like a desire to not fully understand what what I'm writing when I'm writing music, because I want to come back to it years later and be able to find new things in it. Um, but to get back to what how I was framing this here with the universal and the personal, I think it's a lunar way of creating when you allow the muses to, as you were saying earlier, just allow the muses to present themselves and just kind of specifically try to capture that, and um, not tell your own story, essentially. Just kind of capture what comes. And when you do that, uh, you kind of capture a slice of the eternal divine archetypal realm that um, everyone's going to relate to in their own kind of personal way. Um, and then the solar, I think, process would be kind of, I want to tell this story, like I have this thing, and I don't think we should shy away from this either, right? Because there's, um, I think there's a lot of great art that can come about from like, I want to have some intention, go into this, and I want to make a song that's kind of about this. And I think that's a more of a solar approach, is like
Mm.
going in with a plan a little bit, and um, at best getting sort of beyond that specific to the universal, but from that place of starting with your own story
Mhm.
rather than starting with, whatever way the leaves are blowing outside your window or something like that.
Yeah. It makes me
Yeah.
think too of just the old um adage, as above, so below, but also as below, so above. And there's two different orientations to that, you know? And it's like, what direction, like, are you going from the personal out? And because we're all connected regardless, like, the personal is part of the universal and the universal is part of the personal, but just which
Mhm.
direction are you going, and like, where are you orienting yourself from?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we can think of it again as just the moon receives the light from the
Hmm.
sun. It's a physical, and we think of the moon as like our bodies and stuff a lot with astrology and the physical world. Um, so I think about this kind of chance operation of like, here's this stone in the sky, the moon, and then, here's the light that happens to be hitting it right now, as opposed to the sun kind of projecting its own light or its own
Mm,
take, its own vision onto something. Um,
totally. And in our sect
Yeah.
episode, we were also talking about how, when it's daytime and the sun is in the sky, you have this illusion of singularity and individuality because all you can see is the sun. And so if you look at the sky, you might just think that the only thing in the sky is the sun. Except for depending, sometimes the moon is also visible at daytime. But then at night, when it gets dark, you actually see the multiplicity of stars and that there's actually this entire universe out there. So then, you can also see that like singular versus multiplicitous consciousness reflected in that as well. And I want to give credit to Jason Hawley for being the one who made me conscious of that difference.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Should we
Yeah,
talk
for
a little
sure.
more about like astrology and the different like solar and lunar ways of practicing astrology as well? Because I think that's really interesting too to mull over.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess that's kind of the difference just between like very intuitively reading and being really dipped in like theory, or
Hmm.
almost like the mythology and the story, like the storytelling of astrology versus the actual math and science and the numbers of it.
The zodiacal releasing and the algebra of the
Right, right.
bounds and or of the
Yeah.
not the bounds, gosh, the lots.
The
The
lots.
algebra
Yeah,
of the lots.
yeah.
Yeah, all of the technique.
Right, right. Because there's a huge difference between astrologers who use theory and who use a lot of the like mathematical points, um, and then just like the storytellers. And I think like I personally kind of bounce back and forth between both, almost like intuitively based off who I'm talking to, or like
Mhm.
who's getting the reading, or who, um, like if I feel like someone who's getting a reading is more lunar in general and they're just like free flowing and like they just want their chart to be like done in full metaphor, then like that's how I do it. And but then I definitely have charts too where people like just want the like facts and the numbers, and I'll give them more of the like timing technique stuff, and um start pulling progressions and start pulling all these other charts that can show um more more of how like the actual math of it works, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. And one thing for me is like I guess this is a question of like, what headspace are you kind of putting yourself in when
Hmm.
you're like engaging with astrology? And I love both sides of this, and I find myself going uh in rhythms of kind of having more of a lunar phase and like kind of more of a solar phase at different times in my like studies and my practice where at certain times it's really fun to like dive into a technique and test it out on a bunch of charts, and um I'm always like keeping um my own like database of example charts and things, and um or times of like digging into older texts and like trying out different techniques and that kind of thing. Um,
Hmm.
versus other times it feels really good to kind of uh, go to a more embodied practice and just actually look at the stars in the sky and like
Hmm.
not really jump to any conclusions. I find it helpful for me to have times where I'm like not trying to, like not trying to kind of jump to any conclusions about like omens or symbols. So yeah, I think
Yeah.
it's nice to be able to go back and forth, and I think a marriage of the technical and the intuitive
Hmm.
is
Mm-hmm.
something for me I strive for.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it can be really easy to get imbalanced. And like you said earlier, Elias, astrology a lot of times tends to orient a little more solar. And I think that we can, like, this is a solar word, we can objectify our charts and our lives if we just look at the chart and we just look at the data and we just try to pull out like cold and hard, like theory and facts from the
Mm-hmm.
data. Whereas actually, like, what was the living sky like at the moment you were born and took your first breath? Like, if you had been able to step out and look at the sky, where would the sun have been? What shape was the moon? What planets were visible? For me, most of my planets are below the horizon, so you'd go out and you wouldn't see a lot of planets, but if you went out 12 hours after I was born that evening, you would have seen, like, none of my planets are combust, so they would all be very visible. And so really connecting with what's the living sky and how are we talismans for that and how do we embody that and feel that. And then you can add, you can shine a flashlight on to that more sensing embodied version of astrology with the theory, and you can flesh out more understanding by, well, having your sun in the second house means this, or here's some interpretive pieces. But like you're both saying, you really do need to merge both approaches. And I
Mm-hmm.
think it can be easy to just get too technical or to want to show off, how smart you are and how heady you are and how you know all of these ancient techniques, when really, like, actually just what does it feel like to have this sort of placement? And also for compassion, because astrology shows a lot of really, you can look at someone's chart and see some really tender, intimate, difficult things that they're feeling and experiencing and embodying. And to actually have compassion and not just be like, oh, yeah, dark houses are difficult blind spots, but like, oh, actually, what would it feel like to have a lot of dark house placements, and having that more lunar, like, compassionate, like, sensing approach to it, I think is also really important, just to, ethically talk about people's lives in a, sensitive way.
Yeah, and I think also it's super important to remember when you are looking at a chart, like you can make like guesses all day at how this or that might look or feel or have manifested into somebody's life, but like you kind of have to just remember that like every chart is like a living, breathing human at the end of the day,
Mhm.
and like you play out different areas of the chart every like few years or every few months or every few days even sometimes. Like you aren't just one aspect of your chart, and I think we talked about that a lot in the sect episode too, and just like having those life lessons that, this might be a pattern that you live through over and over and over until you break the pattern, and then, what's the next pattern? Or I love the argument of like twins and how like two
Mm.
people with like the exact same chart who grow up together might just like almost on some subconscious level like decide to manifest two different parts of the chart, or like, one might take this part of the personality and one might take that part, and but like their lived experience is going to be fairly similar, but they might be totally different people. And I think that's just something that's important to remember, is like every placement, every aspect, every whatever, um has both extremes. It can manifest as this or it can manifest as that. And ideally, you want to be somewhere in the middle of it. And, during an entire lifetime, at some point, you're probably going to be the low extreme. Sometimes you're probably going to be the high extreme. And then there's going to be moments where another aspect of your chart is playing out some extreme, so you don't have time to worry about this one, so it's neutralized. So like it's almost just like trying to find where the actual humanity comes in the chart itself. And I think like music can do a very similar thing of just like describing a situation um in such a beautiful way too. And like, I'm a huge Taylor Swift fan, and I know she's really known for her lyrics, and that's just like a big thing that I really like about her, is just like how she puts into words these situations that, like, most of us have been through, but like she just has a way of like really pinpointing like, in Would've, Could've, Should've, I think that's a perfect example if you know that song. I was just listening to it the other day, so I'll use it as my example, but she, like, really gets into, like, really oddly specific religious trauma because her ex lived in an old church. So as she's, like, describing this relationship with somebody, she keeps, like, making odd references to, like, losing her faith and losing religion. And like she talks about the stained glass windows and like just how those pieces had like haunted her. And yeah, just things like that I think are so beautiful because, you could say like, oh, I had a heartbreak or oh, this happened to me or whatever. But like finding different ways to like very poetically be like, here's the extreme I went through, I think can be really cool.
Mm.
Yeah, it's a good example. Maybe I don't know that song, but maybe of the like personal
Mhm,
leading to the universal kind of, you finding these threads in there that meant something to you from a somewhat
mhm.
specific maybe story that she is telling through that song. Um,
Yeah, for sure.
yeah. Um, Kind of sticking with the astrology examples, one thing that was just occurring to me was like I think there is kind of a solar bias um, in the revival of traditional astrology
Mhm.
that I've felt um, in
Yeah.
terms of it's really it's almost addicting to be able to like show how a technique works in a chart and like to have a bunch of chart examples and yes this person entered this Mars year and this happened and and that's great for studying I think but while we're talking about astrology and music I think they are both modalities through which we can come into um, relationship with the natural world. I think that was one of the things that
Mhm.
drew me to both of these fields. And with regard to astrology, it's like I remembered being excited when I started tracking the movements of the planets. That now I always felt like I was bad at arranging my life around the Gregorian calendar, and I'm like now I can have a different relationship with time because I don't have to think in terms of weeks and months, and I can oh the moon's in this the last time it was here this was happening and noticing these rhythms felt like I was coming into just a different sort of relationship with the natural world. And I think there's something kind of ironic about this. Yeah, it's really great that we have all these texts that have been translated in the last like 30 years and that we can learn more about what the ancients were actually doing. But I think it's also important for us to try to get ourselves like into that worldview. And for instance, think about how long it it would have taken to calculate a chart by hand in those times or to cast one of these
Mhm.
lots and then we can just on a computer throw it all up at once in a number of seconds. And um, yeah, I mean, I just think that there's it's easy for me to imagine how some of that intimate relationship with like nature and can be a little bit lost when we take these techniques out of context and kind of look at it as like a math problem.
Well, and it's so important to remember that one of the core things philosophically for the ancients was sight and the importance of sight. And when you look at ancient, astrological doctrine, this becomes really important, especially when you talk about aspect theory, is can the planets see each other? And even if they're in a difficult aspect, it's better than them being in a version where they can't see each other. Because when the planets can't see each other, there's no communication, there's no flow of energy. But just sight being so important philosophically. I mean, we've been talking about the sun and moon as well, right? And the luminaries, the
Hmm.
lights in the sky, like we don't have sight without their light, right? And yeah, the ancients were very connected to the living sky. They were watching the movements of the planets every night and witnessing them moving across them and having that connection to sight. And so while the ancient astrologers were also called the mathematicians and they were doing a ton of more solar I mean, sight is also a solar thing, but a ton of
Right.
more like technical, like mathematical calculations. They were also like embodied, like physically rooted into the earth, looking at the sky from that place and having that lunar connection. And like you say, Elias, it's like things have sped up so much in modern life and we can calculate things so fast. And I think there can really be a detriment there when we don't slow down to really value like, oh, this is a life that we're looking at, this isn't just like some fun data to pull for whatever, like this is actually like a lived experience with that Mars activation or whatever, we really have to come back into that lunar compassion and respect like how serious birth charts actually are, like um I've heard people describe birth charts as equivalents of nudes, literally, as far as how vulnerable it is. You don't just want to like look at someone's chart
Yeah.
and like not
Yeah.
respect the privacy that's there, right? And if we just look at it as like all of this data that's really interesting to analyze, but not like this really tender personal, story in life that someone's living, like we can actually cause a lot of harm if we're not being careful.
Yeah, and I also want to point out something that you said, because I was actually just having a conversation with somebody about that yesterday, um, about how like the sun and the moon making aspect or not making aspect can like really be big indicators for every planet. And I was watching a video or podcast or I forget what exactly I saw it on. They were talking about Venus and it was like a Valentine's Day thing. And they were talking about people who get stuck in like situationships or more prone to those type of relationships might have a Venus placement that is not making aspect to the sun and the moon because it's not having a conversation. And I was just thinking about how Venus in general, because it can be like making money and abundance and creativity. Like there's so many other indicators of Venus rather than just relationships. Um, but like having that Venus placement, especially like in my chart's case, because mine is like sandwiched between my sun and the moon, literally the one sign in between. It is kind of a blind spot to both of them, and it doesn't see either of them. I mean, technically it's 9 degrees away from my moon, so you could argue it sees my moon. But like it's kind of just this like blind energy of like how do you fully tap into a planet that doesn't see either of your luminaries, especially when like the luminaries are so important. And what does that mean for that planet? So like in Venus's case, like how do you have a relationship when you like when what you want in a relationship might not see your sun and your moon, your personality. Like they might not get along, they might not see each other. It's a blind spot. So like how do you have a working relationship, or how do you make money, or how do you create something? Um, and then arguably you could do that with every planet if you have Mercury sandwiched between your sun and your moon, or if you have Mars sandwiched or whatever, like not making an aspect to either of them. Like, how do you really tap into the energy of those planets when they aren't being lit up or aren't in communication with anything else?
Yeah, 100%. Communication and sight are just so important to making sense out of
Hmm.
astrology. I also
Yeah.
just want to do a quick time check because we're coming up on about an hour and 10 minutes. So I'm not sure how long we want to stay here, but are there any more thoughts that we haven't really gotten to? I mean, as like Elias and I were talking, prepping for this episode, and it's like you could do an entire podcast series on astrology and
Yeah.
music,
Yeah,
but
for real.
anything that feels like it needs to be said kind of in relation to what we've been talking about.
I don't think so.
I think we kind of hit a lot of it. I have like just kind of off the top of my mind, like kind of a two personal heroes of musical heroes of mine that I could touch on. One's more of kind of a lunar hero to me, and the other's more of a solar one.
Yes, please.
So I'll start with the lunar example. Um, Joni Mitchell, I
Mm.
think her birth time is it says like A rated, but it's a little bit fishy. But if what we have is correct, then she's a Cancer rising with the moon on the midheaven. So
Oh,
How
like
very
me.
did
prom.
we know like that?
Hey, what sign is your moon
Uh,
in?
Aries.
In Aries. Okay, she's got it in
Mhm.
Pisces. Um,
Okay. I have a Pisces Venus in midheaven.
nice.
Mhm.
Um, and I think she is a great example of kind of using just like the intuitive compass in her like writing like really comes through, and as a guitar player too. I don't think she ever really had a musical theory background, um, but she ended up playing with, you know, some of the best jazz musicians and very technical musicians, and a lot of her songs are very harmonically rich, despite um, her obviously not approaching them from that perspective. And she developed a lot of like alternate tunings on guitar because she had polio and could only really had limited mobility in some of her fingers. So um, kind of her ability to work through that limitation, um, and create something um, really innovative is really cool. I also think she's a very um, a lot of lunar sensibilities come through like in her performances. Um, you know, even very composed songs and melodies, she sings differently every time, and it, you know, it depends on who's on the stage with her. And um, I just saw her do like uh, a, a version of Both Sides Now at the Grammys, and it was just amazing how fresh her delivery of like each line in the song was, and it just she feels like such a free performer. Um, so yeah, that's kind of my lunar.
Where's her sun? Is she a day chart or a night chart?
Um,
Sorry, if you don't have it up, we don't need to worry about it. But...
I got it. She's a Scorpio, Sun and Mercury.
Okay, so night
So
chart.
that would be 5th house.
Yeah,
A lot of
yeah,
water.
yeah. And her fifth house is ruled by Mars,
Yeah,
which
a
is
lot of
conjunct
water. So
Saturn.
much water.
She's got Mars conjunct Saturn in the 12th house,
Ooh.
um, ruling her Sun and Mercury. And I mean, even in the notion that she had polio and overcame that, and her journey is kind of like illustrated there. But yeah,
Interesting. I also have my sun in
Yeah, it's
Scorpio
really
and moon in
interesting.
Pisces. So between Lori's Cancer rising, we are Joni Mitchell.
yes, amazing.
I know, that's really funny. And the moon on the midheaven.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
Yep. I love that.
yeah.
That's so funny.
Venus in Virgo.
Mm.
Yeah, beautiful manifestation of this chart. Um, yeah, I could move on to
Yeah,
the
that's so
the
interesting.
sun
Yeah.
example,
Go for
which
it.
we don't have a timed chart, but it's Pat Metheny, who's a guitar player, did play with Joni Mitchell at a concert that I watched a video of. Um, but he has Sun and Mercury in Leo, and
Mhm.
very prolific artist who um, kind of like invented his own like kind of genre of sort of like pastoral jazz sounding country and Americana inspired kind of like improvised music. And he has so many projects that are just like amazing in their scope of vision. And like he had this one that was like I think the Orchestrion project or something like this, and he had like this whole set that had all these mechanized like robotically programmed instruments like vibraphones and like glass jars that wind would hit them at different, and they were all like programmed so he could do this like I think he had some of them were like solo, just him and that setup, and others were like with a full band. Um, but you know, produces like huge detailed scores, and then hires the right musicians to really kind of realize these grand visions that he has. Um, and he does that all without sacrificing any of the kind of spontaneous lunar sensibilities that I also was kind of talking about before. Um, and but yeah, just in terms of a solar kind of voice, he's good at kind of doing the solar thing without making it about himself. And
Mm.
like when he plays on other people's records too, you know, he if he's taking a solo, he'll come in really strong and, you know, make his statements and stuff, but he's really listening to everyone. And I think it's just a good example of like solar leadership and kind of awareness in a way that does not come off as like egocentric at
Mm.
all. And I think it's good for us to have like try to find examples of solar energy that are not kind of egocentric. Anyway,
Yeah. That, well, because the sun allows for all life to grow, right? Like the sun is an incredibly life affirming planet.
Mhm.
And I think that Leo energy and solar energy and one of its better manifestations can be incredibly empowering. And also thinking of where
Mhm.
are you shining your light? Like my midheaven's in Leo, but my sun is in Scorpio. So I'm like, got this visible bright midheaven, but I'm like, don't look at me because it's the Scorpio sun. So then for me, rather than it being like all the attention on me as the solar Leo midheaven person, it's like, how can I shine my spotlight on others? Which kind of sounds like what you're talking about too, is that he has his spotlight and
Yeah.
his like power and light and energy, but then he's also like stepping back and working with others and empowering others. And I agree. There's a lot of really beautiful things about Leo and solar energy, and there's some not so great things, just like every sign, but it's important to look for the, more positive manifestations of it.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, you really get a sense that it's like with his music, it's like about the music. It's not about like any one person.
Mm.
Um, and I had something else to say, but I think my brain is getting a little tired at this point.
Yeah, we've been
Um,
on
Same.
here for a little while.
yeah, yeah, it's been fun.
Well, should we wrap up then? Does that seem like a good
Yeah.
point?
I'm down.
Okay, cool. Usually how we like to end things is just sharing a little bit about what we have going on, how people can reach out or stay in contact with us. This episode will be released probably late March, early April. So, yeah, how can people stay in touch with what you're doing, Elias?
Yeah, I have a website for my astrology stuff, um, which is Elias Romero Astrology.com, I think. And I think there's like a email linked on there if you want to reach out. Yeah, and I have like a Bandcamp page with some of my music. And yeah, I've just been working on trying to have a lot of music and kind of astrology writing and articles that I'm trying to put out at some point this year. So yeah,
Awesome. And do you offer astrology readings right now?
I do. I do.
Cool. So,
Yeah.
folks, get a reading with Elias. Very great. They know so much, honestly. Every time we talk, I'm just like, yeah, you're heady.
Oh, thanks.
Cool. And what do you have going on, Lori?
Um, Not too much right now. Since I'm taking over the shop, which we talked about in the last episode, I'm not doing too much other than that, because that's going to be a huge shift. So yeah, just trying to transition into all of that, and I will be offering more readings and stuff once I'm officially in there and have a little bit more of an office space. Um, and yeah, and then like I said earlier too, I will be doing a lot of in-person events in Cincinnati. So if you are in Cincinnati, you're welcome to join us. I will try to at least get most of them, the ones that make sense at least, on streaming as well. So I will hopefully be teaching a lot more workshops that are going to be available online.
Awesome. And what's the name of your
Mhm.
shop for folks who are in the Cincinnati area?
Yeah, it's called the Mindful Nest. It's a metaphysical
So,
supply shop. Mhm.
so exciting.
It's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then this spring I'll be gearing up to be opening my astrology readings again because they've been closed while I've been just like skiing and frolicking in Utah. But I'll be kind of
Mhm.
splitting up my astrology readings. I'll have offerings that are topically specific. I'll have an asteroid astrology reading, an herbal astrology reading. I also make astrologically personalized herbal teas for folks. And so my bookings will be opening pretty soon. If you want to be notified of when they do, you can go to my website and sign up for my newsletter, and you'll be the first to hear. And I also give out some discounts for folks subscribe to my newsletter. Um, yeah, and then we have an Instagram for the Conversations with the Planets
Mhm.
podcast, and so go interact with us there. Yeah, let us know what you think. This is just such a big topic with astrology and music, and I hope it's been pretty clear as we've talked about this that so much of it is, personal
Yeah.
experiences, embodied outlooks on it, like everyone's take. The more we're all musing over this and wrestling with how these things interact with each other, the richer the conversation is. So let us know what you think, reach out. Um, yeah, and just thanks everyone so much for listening.